we're going over universal truth principles. Last week we began with the I am that I am, and how powerful it is when we live in that absolute essence of our nature that is all life, that is birthless and deathless. It doesn't come, it doesn't go, it is always there. Infinite love, infinite peace, harmony, joy. There are no walls, there are no borders. It is all creation. There's no place where it stops and there's anything else. The I am, there is no other, there is no opposite. The I am that I am. And the more we identify with that essence, we begin to feel our freedom and the infinite possibilities that we are. And it's from that place, what do we have here? Page 1. So it's from this place that we move into the creative process. There's our creative process. Yay. What I love, this is the symbol that we have for Centers for Spiritual Living. I'm going to explain it today, but what I love about this and why I want to explain it today is because we actually can fit we're going through the world's religions, we can actually fit the theology of all the world's religions in this symbol. We can also, it's universal. In philosophy, what happens to me is I start mapping it out on a circle and I start reading a new idea. I'm like, well, how does that fit into this? It's so exciting because it's all inclusive when we start to understand it. So because there's so much there, I recognize that we can't do it all in one Sunday. So we're going to talk about the creative process, the basics, the essence of it this week. And then next week we're going to go even deeper into what it is. It's your 3 bodies, because that also represents who you are. And the 3 bodies that are alive and awake in you, and it's going to go deeper into that state, those different states of consciousness and being, and how to activate them and practice them on your spiritual journey. This isn't just a mental process, that this is activating our whole being. So we're going to get into that next week. But first we want to begin with the basics. What is the creative process? So last week I was explaining that the circle itself is the I am that I am. It is everything, unlimited. And then at the top of our symbol is what we call first cause. First cause, so the I am that I am is formless, empty. It has everything, and yet it's empty. And the moment it has this conception, this idea, Thomas Howard, who is a New Thought leader from the early 1900s, called it the divine prototype. And in that idea, first cause is its fulfillment. The idea of it being like an acorn. An acorn has the fullness of the oak tree in it. It hasn't fully realized itself as an oak tree, but it has that perfection of the idea. The middle space is what in Centers for Spiritual Living we call the law. I like to call it energy, because the law is energy. Everything by the way, this symbol, where Ernest Holmes and Thomas Howard got their theology was from Hinduism. And if you read Hindu theology, their cosmology of how the universe began, it's always with an idea, and then it moves into this energy form. And that's all happening in the middle level. What we liken it to, just to make it very clear and simple, is a seed, soil, and plant. So the seed is the new idea, the acorn. You put the acorn in the soil. You put a seed in the soil, which is that middle part, right? That's the energy. The energy is going to take that idea, and it's filling it with energy, and sometimes for those of you who can see energy, you'll see it sort of swirling around this idea. Now you can see. The idea you can't see. It's formless, there's no energy, there is, but it's so subtle you can't see it. At the energy body level, you can start seeing the idea taking root, taking a pattern. These are where the patterns really get fulfilled. And then the bottom part of our little chart there is form. That's the plant that gets birthed that comes up from the soil. That energy swirls around a pattern. That pattern becomes so solidified that it takes on a form. And that's what we are. Actually, every one of us is that bottom part. This is form. That's how it works. It's so easy. I'm done. We'll go the deeper part next week. The idea is, so we're always creating, one of the things this is who we are. This is a map of who we are. We are always creating. So if there's any part of you that says, I'm not creative, I hear people say there's creative people and not creative people. Everybody's creative, and I don't mean partially creative or a little bit creative, wholly creative. That the Spirit itself, the reason why we are here is because Spirit itself is creative. It cannot help but be creative. It is constantly creating itself. It created itself into being through and as us, and we are made in the image and likeness of being, so we are constantly creating every single day of every moment. You created this morning. You are part of that process that created being here. You've created your life day in and day out, every single day. Your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your habit patterns are creating the life in which you are living. And that's not just as individuals. Collectively, we're creating. So I don't mean you individually just created the service. All of us collectively, vibrationally brought this service into form. So everybody, I want you to really own this very first part. This is the I am nature of us. The I am of us is creative. We can never be outside of this creativity. We are never at a time when we're not creative. The challenges happen, however, is when we are unconscious that we are always creative. So what happens, when you, I'm sorry, I'm not a gardener, but there's what they're called annuals, where you plant it in the ground and it shows up every year, right? Perennials. What's an annual? I don't know what an annual. Oh, annuals once a year. Okay, forget annuals. Perennials. So you can tell I'm not a gardener. I'm glad I prefaced that. So what happens with so many of us when we're born into our families and we have this, the middle part is where the patterns are. Remember I said the idea goes into that middle part and it creates patterns? We're all patterns. That's what we are. So from the moment we're born, some people say we are born with patterns. We're not a blank slate. We have propensities, patterns from whether it's other lives or genetic predisposition, both and. However you choose to see it, there's no question that once you're in this world, patterns start to form. And what happens then is those patterns become who we are. We are patterns, and we're not always conscious. So it's creating as perennials. It just keeps showing up in our life. And so often we're walking, Reverend Michael calls it the walking dead, because we're not conscious that we're creating. It's being created through that second part. It continues to move through us, but we're completely unconscious of it. So the joy of this beautiful teaching that we're in, and not just Centers for Spiritual Living, but all New Thought, and many people who are teaching this way beyond the borders of New Thought, is we become conscious of who and what we are. We become conscious and co-create what we want in our life. We can change those patterns. Those patterns in the middle are so ingrained in us, so the idea is first to become conscious of them, that that's not actually who I am. Those are just patterns running me, and that I actually have a choice. I don't have to live these patterns anymore if I don't want to live them, and that I could so I'm down here. All of us are down here, but I can choose. I have the power of choice to move up to that top place, align myself with that first cause idea, and have a new experience, have a new way of seeing things. So I have a friend who, what I want to say is it's hard, sometimes harder than we think. Actually, I'm going to give first a great example of how it's working, and then when we have a challenge. When it's working, was that we had the best example this last week. I got her permission today, Kim Chen today, last week, of how this creative process works. So it's okay to share, right? Double checking. So Kim went hiking last week, and she had her backpack on, and she got to the top of a peak, and there was litter on the ground, and she wanted to pick it up, but she couldn't bend over with her big backpack on, so she went to take her backpack off, and her chain, which had two pendants that really means a lot to her. One was her cross, Jesus, and a heart that she got from her husband, received from her husband on our anniversary. They went flying off. She said, "Those are my symbols of my two guys," as she says. And so the person she was backpacking with, she was very upset, and they just looked everywhere. She said, for 15 minutes, we just scoured the ground. We could not find them. She went home. Her friend has a metal detector, so she's going to go up the next day to use a metal detector to find these pendants. But she also was doing her inner work about what was real and what was true. So in class that night, we're in the Artist Way class, she just kept saying, I know I'm going to find them. I know, and I want you all to pray and know that I will find them. And there was such clarity in her I knowing. It wasn't, maybe I will, or it just seems too impossible. It was, I know I am going to find them. And I know you are holding me that I am going to find them. And there was just this collective agreement that, yes, we're with you. She knew it. That's the law. She went to first cause. And in that knowing, the next day, she goes up to the same spot. She brings her husband. And what she has shared is her husband does not have great eyesight, that he, in fact, if they're playing golf, he has to play with somebody because he's too blind to see. So he's the one she brings. But she has her metal detector, so it's okay. So she says, here's the spot where I lost my 2 charms. And he looks down and he goes, well, they're right there. They had looked for 15 minutes the day before. She came home. She did her inner work. Consciousness always precedes form. What we're saying is that first part, knowing the truth, seeing it, feeling it, tasting it, smelling it, knows the truth. She said it, and then she let it go. She released it. She said, I know. When we say I know and you really know, that's the release. That's when you are letting it go into law because you know. And in that knowing, done like that. Great story, isn't it? And yes, she took a picture of it, and they're the size of a dime, so they're very small. Right there, instantly. We can be as specific with this law as we want. I heard another story just this morning where this woman was upset, a grandmother was upset because her daughter-in-law, she had sent many, many gifts to her daughter-in-law and granddaughter, and never heard back from them, and it was hurting her heart. So she decided to use her power of thought to say, you know what, I'm just going to imagine this differently. So she started writing the letters from both of them that she wanted to receive, and in detail. So it wasn't like she just imagined receiving a letter and how she felt. She was very specific of what she wanted the letter to read. And she went through the words, and she did it every single night before she went to sleep. And she imagined herself opening it. She imagined exactly what the letter said, how she felt. She experienced the whole thing and then would go to sleep 7 days in a row. And, of course, she got 2 letters from her daughter and granddaughter saying virtually what she had written in her head about what she wanted. This is an extraordinarily powerful, powerful, creative energy that we can activate all the time, anytime. We're already activating it. You're activating it right now. It's about being conscious of what we're activating, being conscious of where our thoughts are, be conscious, are these just old patterns running me, or am I actually consciously speaking into this law of creation, who and what I want to be and what I want to experience in the world outside? Great, isn't it? The challenges are when we get stuck in those patterns, that it's hard to bring in a new idea. So I have a friend who, she wanted to shift. She wasn't doing very well financially, and she wanted to shift how that was showing up for her. So she would do this rockin' prayer, just the way we do our prayer treatment. Oh, I have to do that too. And for the perfect job, literally the same day after she does this incredibly powerful prayer of knowing that she's won, and she has a perfect work, this person comes and presents a job to her. She starts telling me, answer prayer, immediate manifestation. And she starts telling me about it, and I'm like, isn't that a pyramid scheme that you're talking about? And she said, no, this is different. So I went with her, and it was a pyramid scheme. It was sort of her old habit pattern coming through. Marianne Williamson, relationships, number one conversation that I have with people since I've been a minister, relationships. Marianne Williamson said there's no such thing as that all these bad people are coming into your life. It's just that we give them our phone numbers. Isn't that great? The key is we have patterns are familiar to us. So when we pray and we get an immediate demonstration, often what we're getting is that middle chart. That creative force is saying, oh, you want a job? You've done this a million times. I'll just give it to you again, and it's immediate. Really changing our idea and understanding of something often takes time. Repetition, repetition, repetition. And the more stuck this pattern is in us, the more identified we are with that pattern, the more entrenched, even attached. That's the whole in every spiritual teaching. Release attachment and resistance, because that middle part is all attachment and resistance. The more attached we are to certain things that we want, it's very hard for a new idea to flow through into a new creation. And that's where all the blocks start happening, is because we're not creating that space. So when, in that particular case, and Mary Anson Williamson said the same thing with relationship, if the immediate demonstration is our pattern, we have to start saying no. I've prayed for something new, and you're not new. I know you. I've been there before. No. We have to start creating that space for this new idea to come through. And often it takes time. That's the power of the creative process and actively participating in it. Now, I'm going to talk about this in two forms, and we're going to go a little bit deeper on both forms next week too. So that's when we are consciously creating the world that we want. And it's powerful and it works. The next aspect I want to talk about is the creative process through surrender. This is a little bit different, and the idea of it is a little bit different. Surrender generally doesn't work unless we've learned how to use the creative process consciously first. And I'll explain that in a minute. Surrender is when we're down here, and we keep getting in our same patterns. That soil just keeps popping up, the same plants in our life, the same forms, and I want to change them. I've used the creative process before, and still I'm not really getting what I want. I'm fulfilling, I'm working the creative process, I'm getting new form, but it's still not really reaching what I'm looking for. Often surrender comes to us when we've just had enough of our own mind. Because even what we create, let's say I want a perfect, I'm going to use relationships next week, because relationships take us much deeper, and it's just I want to go in that next week. Let's say I want a new house. Often in my head, the reason why I want a new house is because all my friends have a new house. Or I drive by other houses, I want that. It's not necessarily what I want, but I'm influenced by what other people have. And so I use the creative process and I get what I want, but it's still not really connecting with my soul. And this happens all the time. I was just sharing with a young woman who's going into school thinking about being a psychology major. And I was a psychology major, and I was very interested in how people became who they were. But the class I remember the most was social psychology class. I was amazed. Every day, I remember it more than any other class because I'm amazed how much we impact one another. So often our desires, the things that we long for, are not always really what our deepest soul wants. It's what we think we see around us, we see on television, we see our friends having, and we think, I want that too. And we haven't really claimed who we are as an individual. Surrender is about saying, I don't know what my soul wants. I don't know what I'm here to express. I don't know what's going to bring me joy. I am going to surrender to a higher intelligence. I'm going to surrender to the infinite I am that knows everything. And I am going to trust it to bring into form something new in my life that I never planned. Going back to this idea of divine prototype, that's another word saying God's will. The idea is, from this infinite I am, the circle, birthed an idea, first cause, top of the chart, the divine prototype. And the idea is that each and every one of us has a divine prototype for our life. That there's actually an intentional prototype for who and what we are. And so it's like if an acorn has free will, and so it's like, I want to be a petunia. No, I want to be an oak tree. Or no, not an oak tree. Totally misses my point. Maple tree. Eucalyptus tree. It wants to be everything but itself. It might be able to manifest those things, but there seems something that's out of alignment. Surrender is the idea of I want to align with who that divine prototype for my life is. So we surrender, we let go, and that's really the going within and hearing that intuitive voice that guides us, that teaches us where we want to be. The key to this, however, when we surrender, is not surrendering to the middle part, not surrendering to not only our patterns, but race-conscious patterns. So I remember someone saying once, I surrender because it's just easier. When you're creating, you have to constantly mentally visualize. You're creating in your head. And then when you get it, you have to visualize something else. And it's like this constant work. Like, I need to keep creating. Or even if you're just doing qualities, I'm creating health, I'm creating beauty, I'm creating harmony. You just got to keep at it, where surrender is just allowing. You just surrender and trust. But the dangerous part of that is if you're surrendering to the wrong thing, you're just going to be surrendering to old habit patterns, yours or somebody else's. Because at that middle level, this energy, we're connected with everyone energetically. So it's not just what's happening in our own subconscious, it's what's happening in everybody's subconscious, not only from this time and space, but from all time and space. This energy contains all human thought and experience, actually beyond just human thought and experience that's ever existed. So when we're surrendering, we're not surrendering to the soil. We're not surrendering to the energy, because the energy isn't where our divine prototype is. So it's not totally relaxing as sometimes as passive, I would say, not as passive as we think. We still have to consciously keep our attention on first cause. We need to constantly put our attention on that which is free of all habits, that which is free of energy, anything that I can see, taste, touch, or smell, even if you sense auras, if you have mystical experience, if anything that you can talk about, it's not it. It's beyond that. And so we need to keep putting our attention to that which you cannot see, taste, touch, or smell, or describe with words, or feel in other vibrational frequencies if you go into non-ordinary state experiences. LSD, mushrooms, you have these psychedelic experiences, woo! They're all great, but it's beyond even that. That's where our attention needs to continue to stay. And that's why New Thought music is great, because the more we sing it, it keeps our attention on that first cause idea. And that's what we're surrendering to. That's what we want to allow to move through and as us. And the challenge is, because it's not where our pattern is, it's unfamiliar. We're not going to recognize it and say, oh, that's me. Oh, I resonate with it. There'll be some aspect of us that does, but it's going to be completely unfamiliar. Spirit's job in our life is to help us to continue to grow and expand. We are infinite beings. It's not going to allow us, its divine idea for every one of us, for every being on this planet, is to be more than what we've been in the past. What is it? It is here to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So it will heal us when we need healing, when we need comfort, when we're going through difficult, painful experiences. We need Spirit as support and love and tenderness and gentleness and nurturing. And in our spiritual journey, it's always going to expand us beyond what we've known. So you're not going to say, oh, this is familiar. I've been here before. Oh, of course this is where I'm going to be led. There's going to be, I'm amazed in my journaling process how many times I am guided to something, non-ordinary experience, it's so clear, and I just keep journaling like it never happened. And it takes me weeks to finally say, you know what? Because it's so beyond my realm of thought that I don't even have a way to think about it, because it's completely new. It takes a while for it to take seed. The challenge with surrender, and I'm going to give it 2 examples, is it requires time, and it requires an incredible amount of trust. Because in that middle level where all race consciousness exists, many of us grew up from our childhood. Not even if we didn't grow up that way, it's around us. We can pick up the race consciousness that God is a whimsical God, that God punishes, it rewards, it has a personality, and it's going to give some people good things and be mad at you and put you through tests. And it's not really a God that you would feel safe with. The reason why we start doing the co-creative process and realizing that we can create what we want, that we have that power, we start realizing that this power is actually infinitely good. And so when we surrender, we have to know to the very depths of our being that no matter what is emerging in form, it's good. And that we can trust it. We can be safe. I can let go. I don't need to be in control anymore. I don't need to figure out what's my next step. I can trust, I can trust, I can trust. That's the energy of surrender. So I'm going to give one example. I'm going to give, sorry. I'm going to try, I'll do it really fast. Many of you already know the story, so I'm going to go through it very quickly, but it gives you a sense of surrender. The beginning of Agape, which is a spiritual community in LA. Reverend Michael and Reverend Nirvana met as teens, loved each other. Reverend Michael had a spiritual experience. They started going to a Centers for Spiritual Living called the Guidance Center, Guidance Church of Religious Science on Crenshaw in LA. Dr. Dan Morgan was their minister, and they started learning these principles, practicing them, become practitioners. They started what they call the Agape Love Workshops, and they did them all around LA as practitioners. At that point, Reverend Nirvana was very much in the lead. Reverend Nirvana has a very extroverted, out there personality. Reverend Michael was much the quieter person, would sit in the background. So I'm not as clear how long Nirvana was a practitioner. Reverend Michael was a practitioner for 7 years before he became a minister, doing these workshops, building up a following. People from all over would come to their workshops. And then this call to ministry came. And the call came to Reverend Michael. And so Reverend Michael and Reverend Nirvana created this circle of 20 people. They met in a living room, and they did this thing called the visioning process, which is sort of a structured listening. What is the divine vision for this spiritual community that's wanting to be birthed? They met every week for a year. And the idea was that we're not here to make the vision happen. The vision already exists. The first cause idea already exists. We don't need to make that happen. What we need to do is become that, open ourselves up to it. So it requires a prayer work. So anyone who's done visioning, one of the questions, 2 questions we ask in every visioning: what is my greatest area of growth? What do I need to release? They would do prayer work on that every single week. They would pick a prayer partner after the visioning. They would pray at the visioning, and then throughout the week on the growth and expansion. So it wasn't about getting a spiritual community, creating out there, but becoming the spiritual. And we're going to talk more about this becoming next week. But they became the spiritual community, and they created so much intimacy and love, and they started this agape community, which many of you know became a mega center. And then they had to do work, by the way, when it started to grow, that group had gotten so close that many of them didn't like the new people that were coming because it was sort of breaking up their intimacy. And so they had to do work on that, expanding, letting the borders down, their walls down to include everybody. And they did this work very consciously and intentionally to be that place of unconditional love to everybody, not just their immediate friends. First of all, it took time. LA is a very creative place with a lot of creative artists. Being at Agape, people have ideas all the time, and they're great ideas. And many of you know Reverend Michael's rule was, you're not allowed to start a new ministry unless you visioned on it for 6 months with a group of people, not just by yourself. And you had to prove that you had. Because until you just slow down, because these ideas come and go really fast. Slow down, listen. What's the vision for this ministry? And it's amazing how many great ideas just sort of dissolve. Unless it's built in spirit, it's built on sand, right? We've heard that. And so the structure, the essence of agape was all birthed through spirit, not through human beings' great ideas. I want to say that. So it takes time. That year they were visioning, they got what the community was in the vision from the beginning. They didn't need to keep visioning every week to get the vision. They visioned every week so they could become the vision. That's what takes time. Again, we'll do that more next week. But the thing I wanted to talk about, the surrender and the trust. For many of you, not all of you, are familiar with Reverend Michael. He became really famous with The Secret. He's very well known. Reverend Nirvana been with Reverend Michael on this whole journey. Reverend Nirvana was the lead when they did these agape love workshops. He's a big personality. He's pure love. This man's brilliant. Surrendering his life to spirit and co-creating this community looked very different for him than it did for Reverend Michael. When I was there, which was, 15, 20 years after it started, 10 or 15 years after it started, he still had a full-time job, not ministry. He was working with LA's Children and Family Services. He would work 40 hours a week. He had a family to whom he was very devoted, his 2 children, his wife, and did everything else extra, all the classes he taught, the weekends. Surrendering for him did not look the same as it did for Reverend Michael. And I've always thought, he's always sort of amazed me because they both amaze me. Because Reverend Michael was more the quiet one who preferred being in quiet. As much as you may see him, if you have heard him talk, he's very energetic. When he's teaching a class, he's actually very quiet. He had to step out and be the forefront. And Reverend Nirvana, whose natural personality, which is very extroverted, took the back seat. Reverend Michael got all the attention. Reverend Nirvana was just as as loved by the people who knew, but not nearly as famous. Surrendering takes us often into paths we don't expect. And the trust has to come that this is where I belong. And I always loved how completely surrendered Nirvana was. He never tried to get in the limelight of Reverend Michael. He completely accepted his own journey, lived it and embodied it, and trusted it. When I talk with people about surrender, that's the biggest issue. I don't know if I feel safe enough to trust this presence, that what it's going to bring into my life is really going to be something I want to see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. I don't know if I want this life that Spirit's going to give me. I don't know if I trust it, that it's going to bring something that is good. I'm sorry. Okay, so that's surrender, trust. How much do we trust God? If you're not in a place of trust, be honest. This whole journey is about being honest. Continue to do the creative process. Participate in creating your world. Don't give up your power. If you're not ready to surrender, do not surrender. It's unhealthy. There's no judgment. The Spirit is completely unjudgmental. Continue to create your world that you want. If you haven't done that yet, do it. Create the world that you want. Continue to use the creative process. And when that opening happens to surrender, you'll know. Thirdly, that's why because I want to get to the divine feminine. Consciousness precedes form. Many years ago, I had an experience of becoming one with the Divine Mother. I remember when I had that experience, sharing it with somebody, and they go, oh, I've had that experience with Isis. I had it with, it came through the statue of Mother Mary. She had it with Isis. And then I was listening to Andrew Harvey, who's a wonderful spiritual teacher. Look him up sometime. And he was talking about how people all over were having these experiences of the divine feminine, this divine feminine energy. And this was back in the 90s, early 2000s, and I kept thinking, why is it happening? Why is he saying there's something happening with the divine feminine energy? That so many people are beginning to have experiences with the divine feminine. It takes time. Look at nature. Everything, it happens all at once, but it's been building. It's building that consciousness precedes form. All this consciousness was being building, and then I look at the Women's March that happened last year. Huge numbers. And then the Me Too. Suddenly, this demand of the feminine energy coming up and demanding healing, demanding to be visible, demanding to be seen. Consciousness precedes form. All this consciousness work has been happening for decades, and it's coming out now into form with the Me Too, with the unequal pay salaries. I remember a world religions teacher, someone asked him what the Eastern teaching that has had the biggest impact on the West, and we're all waiting to hear if it's Buddhism or Hinduism. And he said Taoism, which we will do next month. He said Taoism is like feminine energy. Masculine energy comes through the front door and announces itself. It's going to tell you what it is. It's going to preach what it is. Feminine energy comes in through the back door and fills the whole house, and you don't even know it's there. That became really significant to me this past week as my I have my own journey, and so I have 3 wonderful brothers. I love them. I know they have my back. They're just the greatest beings, and they're very masculine. So my brother closest to me in age, he's taken on yoga. He's now become a yoga teacher in the last year or two, and he writes about it all the time to my other brothers. They're just talks. So then he sent out this thing about they're teaching mindfulness meditation to police officers. And my another brother said, it's great that you're on the cutting edge of this. And I had to stop and think. I'm like, wait a minute. Cutting edge? He's been doing it for 2 years. I've been doing this for like 30 years. Not only me, but so here was the key. And I started thinking about it. I'm like, and this is... Father's Day will come and we will honor the masculine. So I'm not trying to leave out, and by the way, we all have the masculine and feminine within us, and it's all about degrees of energy. Thank you, God, for that. Jack and I play in those different worlds all the time. But in general, so I'm not acknowledging feminine energy, the feminine energy in everyone. The feminine energy has been alive and activated doing this spiritual work for decades in spiritually progressive communities all over. I can't speak to the world because I haven't had much experience in the world, but in this country, the classes that are happening, the meditation practices are 90% women. And women tend not to talk about it as much. So the women in this room, you're doing this work, you've been doing this work for years, and you're taking it into your homes, into your families, into your relationships. You may not be talking about it, but you're building that energy. Sometimes you are talking about it, sometimes you're not, depending on the receptivity. You're taking it into your workplaces. You're bringing those intentions, that vibrational frequency to your bosses, to your clients, to your colleagues, everywhere that you are, the divine feminine energy is, that's been alive and practicing for decades now. Consciousness precedes form, has been happening through all of you, and women are the mainstream. Because I'm hearing now it's hitting the mainstream. I'm like, well, the mainstream is because now it's on the front cover. Remember, masculine energy comes in the front door and announces itself. Feminine energy has been coming in through the back door, filling the house for decades now. So I want to acknowledge the feminine in this room for all the work that you do, for every class that I've been in with that's filled with women who are doing the work day in and day out for decades. And you often do it very quietly, but you're doing it, and you're powerful, and you are so, so powerful, and you are deserving of all the healing that's happening on our planet right now with the Me Too. You are deserving of equal pay. You are deserving to be seen. And so I was thinking about this analogy of the front door and the back door. And so I was thinking, well, we want the feminine. I love the feminine energy filling the home, but it's time to be seen and to acknowledge and to know who we really are and to stand in our power, to continue to stand in our power. The divine feminine is first cause. I get in arguments, well, I won't even go there. Often the divine feminine is taught as the middle part, as the soil, because we're receptive. Feminine energy is receptive. And I'm very clear, feminine energy is first cause. We are powerful. We are a divine idea created into form, that we are causative, we are volitional, we are abundant, we are beautiful, because we are pure spirit. So today I want to honor the divine feminine, the creative process that has been working through and as us for decades in consciousness, and is now birthing itself into form, to visible, being seen more than ever before. I love all of you. I love this creative process. Let us continue to dance and play in it. We'll continue next week to go even deeper with it. And let's pray.